Okay, we're back. I know this gimmick is so stupid, but it's entertaining to me. Okay, so essential trait. That's where we're going. Last time, we talked about the many trait and the single trait approach, and I gave you the warm up of here's where we're going, this is important, so here's where we're going, this is important. And I will ask you on this second test, what are the big five, and name them. I'm telling you this now, that it's going to be a test question. Okay, so how do we decide which trait? So the essential trait approach is kind of not a compromise, but here's the fundamental question. Which traits are most important? Do we really need all of them? Do we really need the 2,800 that Warren Norman collected? Or the even longer one, I think one of the Cattell brothers. Which traits really matter? Which traits are essential? And it's, without distilling down the traits, it's a really hard challenge, essentially, to study personality. You get this weird, almost alphabet soup list of traits where people just pick ones. So some of the greater theorists of our time tried to use theory to reduce the many traits to just a few. So Murray, the same Murray that we've talked about a couple times, broke it down into 20 needs, which is still a lot. And these include aggression, autonomy, exhibition, order, but they're based on theory. So at least it's fewer. Now, Jack Block, who was one of David Funder's mentors, broke it down into 2. Ego control, which was all about impulse control, and ego resiliency, which was all about psychological adjustment. This idea that you can adjust your level of control to fit the circumstances. So those that were more resilient, or ego resilient, were more able to adapt. Now, there's another approach rather than theory, which is more data-driven. And here's where that factor analytic technique that I talked to you about way back in the day, in either unit, in the research methods unit or the assessment unit, it kind of lives in both. So instead of doing a theory-driven approach, a couple people have done a more data-driven approach. So what they do is they started with a ton of items. Just like I described using factor analysis to make a scale, that's what they did with 2,800 items. It's a lot. So James McKean Cattell, first of all, he narrowed it down a list. Or no, I think that was there are 2 Cattells. One's Ray and one's James. So your best strategy on the test is just to write to Cattell. Pro tip. So Cattell focused on, applied this technique and narrowed it down to 16 essential traits, including friendliness, intelligence, dominance. So the 16 PF is Cattell's factor structure. And I'm looking over here because I know that I have this book that's of the scale somewhere, but not here apparently. Yay! So Cattell got it down to 16, which is still a lot. And some folks said, that's too many. We need fewer. There can't be 16 essential traits. There has to be fewer. So Eysenck, whose name I don't think is James, I've got it on the next slide. Eysenck narrowed it down to 3. And extroversion, first one that's positive emotionality, neuroticism, negative emotionality, and the last one, psychoticism. Psychoticism was a blend of aggressiveness, creativity, and impulsivity. Now, Tellegen he came up with a similar one, and you'll notice that I pretty much defined extroversion as positive emotionality and neuroticism as negative emotionality. They're very similar, and so I would argue, and that like extroversion and positive emotion, and you'll see it soon, those two are really strongly linked. The real big debate between Eysenck's and Tellegen approaches was that third factor. So for Eysenck, it was psychoticism. For Tellegen, it was constraint, which is kind of self-control, and didn't really have low levels of aggressiveness would be associated with constraint. Doesn't really have much in creativity, low levels of impulsiveness. So constraint and psychoticism kind of were flips of each other, but not exactly. And so here they are. Why did I think his name was James? His name was Hans. So we've got Raymond Cattell. These are all three old, very old / dead white guys. Which is kind of an unfortunate thing about early it's not utterly unfortunate, but there's a lot of the early personality psychologists were white dudes. Not all of them, but most of them. So I'm working on kind of diversifying this class to give you a broader range of perspectives. That had actually been my summer project, but instead I spent that time working on getting the class online. So yeah, fun facts. So Tellegen's Wikipedia page really needs to be updated. These are just the screenshots from their Wikipedia pages, just to get you a nice sense of their summaries. Wikipedia is actually a pretty good resource to orient yourself. Don't copy and paste it. Look at what the references are and go to those references. It's a great starting point. Okay, so yet I haven't gotten to the Big Five yet. So you may be asking yourself, okay, Mason, you keep talking about this Big Five and how that's the most important thing. Sorry, I literally just put this on. It was poking. There we go. Can we focus? No, we can't. Alright, so yeah. How did we get the Big Five out of this? Because none of those were 5. One was 16 and 2 were 3. So instead of just kind of distilling by theory or kind of like curated lists, here's what they did. And this is the basic idea. It's called the lexical hypothesis. It's this idea that important aspects of life will be labeled with words. And if something is truly important and universal, there will be many words for it in all languages. This image here is a glossary from probably one of the first encyclopedias. I know it's not a dictionary, but like close. It's in the Louvre. But so the idea is that if a trait or concept as a way to describe people is omnipresent and important and universal, we will see it across all languages. So what they did was they went to the dictionary. And I have a giant unabridged dictionary in my office that, again, you'll notice I'm very short on props. It's unabridged. It's huge. It's like this thick. And then I just plop it down and be like, here's the list. So that's what they did. They generated a list. And so Warren Norman's 2800 list is derived from the dictionary. And they applied it. They got people to rate themselves on all these different adjectives in the dictionary. It's a lot. And do it across languages. And out comes the Big Five. Now, there are major technical limitations here. It was only until very recently that you could do the type of factor analysis that this would have theoretically required to have all of those, because each like item on each adjective would be its own row, and you get to the point you hit you hit the computation limitations of the time really quickly. So it wasn't until recently that, from a technology standpoint, that you could have put every single adjective in the dictionary. So what they would have to do is kind of take slices and see what kind of factor structure they got back. Now, they did this lots of different ways with lots of different tests. They analyzed other tests, so like the Cattell 16PF. There we go. The Cattell 16PF, and they got 5 factors out of it. About 1945 is where they started to like actually have the factor structure a bit come out of it. Not entirely perfectly, lots of tech limitations, but that's the heart of this idea, is that we're going to find the words that people use. And the words that people use, and if everybody uses them, that means they are describing a meaningful description of people that they vary on. The flip side of that is if you don't have a lot of different words and for like describing that trait, if there is no way, like, that implies that it's not common and it's not one that is important. So there's some implications for this framework. How they modeled them, and this is a more statistical thing that's still a debate, is the traits are unrelated. Each of the big 5 factors are uncorrelated. So you can be high on any one of the 5. So you can be super high on conscientiousness, and that is not predictive of how high or low you are or any of the other 5. So you can be super high on conscientiousness and super low on extroversion, and that's totally fine. Like the fact that you are on one versus like that you're high on one doesn't tell us anything about any of the others, in theory. There's debate on this, so we'll talk more about it. But that's the idea. So all these 5 are unrelated to each other, and so yeah. So I'm getting bogged down in the stats stuff that is a really interesting debate, but it's not in the scope of this class as much as I want it to be. So the most awesome and great thing about the Big 5 is it provided order to a lot of other research findings. So a lot of the the single trait approaches, you would have these kind of not random, but whatever the researcher was interested in. So maybe honesty, which is not like a random trait, and it makes sense you'd be interested in it, but like seeing how people are linked to honesty would give you a lot of information. So people high on honesty are also going to be high on like humility, but you wouldn't know that unless you put them all within this big framework. Now, so it can really connect a lot of ideas together and give us close to like a orienting framework. And it's also really helpful in organizing all your knowledge about personality. And that's how I do it. I put it into the 5-factor structure, and that helps me orient it to everything else, like all the biology stuff we're going to cover. So unfortunately, as cool and amazing, as groundbreaking as this is, it's not that simple. It never is. So the traits aren't exactly uncorrelated. There might be higher order factors. There are higher order factors. One is called stability. And stability is associated with agreeableness and conscientiousness and lower levels of neuroticism. So if you score high on agreeableness, you also are likely to score highly on conscientiousness and score really low on neuroticism. Now, they're not super strongly linked to each other, but on average, there seems to be 2 different clusters of factors. So you've got stability, which I already talked about, and plasticity. So plasticity is extroversion and openness. All right, so you've also got lower order factors. So there are aspects, and aspects is an unfortunate word. So you have this almost like this nested structure. So you've got the higher order factors of stability and plasticity. Then you have the big 5. then under each of the 5 factors, you have different aspects of it, because not everyone who's not everyone is conscientious in the same way. For example, I'm very hardworking and industrious. This is why I'm spending my weekend filming. But as you've seen in my welcome to class video, I am not a tidy or organized person. Hence the green screen. And yet, how do those both fall under conscientiousness? And if there weren't lower levels, it would be very difficult for someone to explain how I can exist from a personality standpoint. And don't worry, we've got a slide coming up that really breaks these down. Labels are also oversimplified because, like, you have all these lower order elements and higher order elements. So it's at least an organizing framework that's really, really, really helpful and is really, really important. But it is not without its critics. It is not without its flaws. So here is the full table. I don't know what page it is in the online book, but it's table 6.3. This is a really important table that I really encourage you to learn about, because so each of these big 5 traits have different facets / aspects. Now, there's the difference between these facets and these aspects are more theory and debate than anything, but they both give you a sense of the different ways you can be extroverted. And you can be high, on average, people who are high on activity are also pretty high on warmth, but it's not perfect, like it's not deterministic, so you can be high on excitement, but not be super assertive. Gregariousness, you can really, really like to talk, but maybe you're a secret grump, so you don't have a ton of positive emotionality. So actually, no, your lack of positive emotionality doesn't mean you have negative emotionality. I apologize. So under the facets is one way to break down extroversion. Aspects is another. Aspects breaks it down into 2. Facets is a little more quirky. Next, you've got neuroticism, which has got facets of anxiety, hostility, depression, self-consciousness, impulsivity, and vulnerability to stress. Colin DeYoung breaks this down just into volatility and withdrawal. Not just, but it's a little briefer. There's also debate on whether this impulsivity really belongs in neuroticism, or does it belong in conscientiousness. Agreeableness, or trusting, straightforward, altruistic, compliant, modest, tender-minded. Well, Colin kind of breaks these down into 2, compassion, politeness. So, for me, I'm really compassionate, but not super polite. So I'm high on one, low on the other. Conscientiousness, again, I've got lots of high on one, low on the other, which is always fascinating. So competence, order, dutifulness, achievement, striving, self-discipline, and deliberation under Costa and McCrae. And Colin breaks them down as industrious or orderliness. I think either the facets or the aspects are equally acceptable ways to think about how to break down the big 5 into smaller elements. But there's research to be done. We haven't settled on which is the best or which is the truest, because this is an ongoing debate. Openness to experience is probably the most debated one of these traits, just from the name. It's the least developed factor. It's actually the last factor from a theory standpoint to have arisen. And it kind of arose more as a consequence of the model than from theory. It's a weird factor analysis thing. So openness to experience is kind of this mixture of fantasy, aesthetics, feelings, actions, ideas, and values. So well, Colin kind of breaks it down into intellect, so like how intellectual are you versus how open are you to new ideas and experiences. Alright, so we are going to actually talk about each of the traits now. I might break this up here, so I'm going to give myself the option by disappearing slightly. And if you don't see a cut here, that means I just decided to keep going.